Have you ever heard of a concierge flight attendant? Or have you ever traveled privately, maybe with a charter flight? Hey guys, it's Erica from America, your favorite flight attendant. Today I'm going to be talking about those two topics. One being a concierge flight attendant, which, if you haven't heard, is another type of flight attendant. So if you are thinking about doing it, you might actually like that, but also about whether or not flying private is cheaper. Today I'm reacting to a guy whose video title basically says that it can be cheaper flying private versus flying commercially, and I do believe that's true. I do have some stories I'm going to be sharing about that. Having said that, let me just say welcome back again to another Travel Tuesday video, guys, where I react to a travel guru's video and give the perspective of a flight attendant. And I keep getting comments here and there about like, why are you doing that? Just give your own advice. The truth is that a lot of times I will think, okay, I'm gonna make my own video and I'm gonna give my advice about this. But there's so much information up here in my head from 8.5 years of flying that I can't remember all of it. And so when I'm making a video, there's a lot of stuff that I forget because I'm focused on this little area right here of what knowledge to give you guys. And so I like doing the reaction videos because sometimes they say something that triggers memories that I haven't thought of in such a long time. So I get to give you guys perspectives from the back of my brain back here that I don't think about anymore because it's just so common in the industry. That's why I like to do these travel reaction videos. Also, they're easier and faster than doing my own. And obviously I don't script this stuff, but I just like to talk. So anyway, guys, today's video, I am going to react a little bit differently. Instead of pausing it every 5 minutes to give my perspective, I'm just going to try to let it play through most of the way, and then I'll just tell you a couple stories at the end that happen to be related to the video. I'll tell you what a concierge flight attendant is. I'll tell you my experience having almost been one once, and the times that I did fly private. So just a little bit extra information, but I think this is a really good video today, and I think you guys are really going to like this. So let's just jump right in, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button because I'm trying to get to 10,000 people. Can't believe I said that. Let's go on. Okay, so the video I'm reacting to today is from Sam Reid, and it's called Turns Out You Can Fly Private for Cheaper Than First Class. Now, I've long thought that I would like to be a concierge flight attendant. And this definitely has me curious because concierge flight attendants are generally not flying like on a regular commercial airline, usually flying on a private airline. And so I'm curious about this. I thought, you know what, let's watch this one. So let's check out Sam Reid first. Sam Reid has 509,000 subscribers, 218 videos, and it says, the feel-good variety show about food, travel, and the questions you didn't know you. And then there's a plug. Sam Reid is a fast food enthusiast, former Olympic hopeful, and your new biggest fan. He's also the host of the Studio Review, which has been making life a little bit lighter since 2021. And then we calm down. Just remember that when it doesn't feel like it, it's going to be okay. I'll see you soon. I like that. I really do. Crisis text line. Wow, he's got some interesting phone numbers there. Makes me wonder more about his channel. Anybody ever heard of him before? Have you watched him before? I've never watched him. Joined June 28th, 2010. About the video. 709,000 views, posted August 29th of last year. I found a ticket on a semi-private airline that was cheaper than some economy flights I've taken in the past, so I had to try it out. And it's a variety show aimed at making life a little bit lighter. He didn't really put much in this, did he? Okay, this guy seems like a very interesting person. As always, I will link his video at the end. But let's go ahead and jump right into this.
One thing about me is that I will always buy the cheapest airplane ticket possible. Stick me in the last row with seats that don't recline. I don't care. I refuse to be nickel and dime. But what if I told you that you could fly on a semi-private airline for basically the same price that I've paid in the past to sit in the middle seat in economy and get kicked by the kid right behind me for the whole flight? That would sound a little bit too good to be true, right? Well, that's what I'm hoping to find out.
That airplane's the nice.
So I first became aware of this airline when I was watching a show called Crime Spree, which was kind of a precursor to Jet Lag the game. And the premise is that they're chasing each other around the country, and I saw this guy Sam book a flight and show up at this airplane hangar. I knew their budget wasn't massive, so I'm like, what is this airline? And the reason I was so curious is because you and I both know how terrible the whole flying and airport experience can be. For starters, economy seats simply aren't built for people over 6 feet tall. They're also not built for anyone to get an armrest. It's just a lose-lose. And then the airport can just kind of be a miserable place. Seating usually isn't great. It's hard to find somewhere to charge your phone. You typically have to walk like 6 miles. Everything costs $1 million. People are just generally stressed. And I can't think of any other industry where companies charge that much money only to deliver that uncomfortable of an experience. And my point in saying all this is that when I saw this airline in the show, I was like, maybe it doesn't have to be that way. So the airline is called Jet Suite X, or JSX for short, and they describe themselves as a public charter air carrier. And besides the jets, their selling points include a private terminal, free checked bags, free snacks and drinks, only 30 other passengers, and the ability to arrive at the airport just 20 minutes before departure. I want to walk you through my experience flying JSX, and then I'll give you my thoughts as to whether it's worth it. I'm also in no way affiliated with this company, so this is going to be an honest review. We'll talk about both the pros and the cons, including the environmental impact. One thing you can tell right off the bat is that their routes aren't quite as widespread as most major airlines. In terms of prices, you can look for yourself, but I describe it as a pretty wide range. The absolute cheapest flight I could find on here was $187, and that's a one-way trip from Houston to Dallas on a weekday, whereas the more expensive one-ways can be upwards of $1,000. This is not a situation where 100% of flights on these jets are going to be cheaper than a seat in economy, but every once in a while you can find a fairly reasonable flight. Also, no matter when I buy plane tickets, it's somehow always immediately after the optimal price window, and Google always likes to rub that in. Like last week, these tickets were $89, but this week they're going to be $289. So if my choice is between a $289 economy flight and a $289 flight on a semi-private jet, the jet feels pretty appealing. I ended up booking a flight from Scottsdale, Arizona, where I was checking out the bathroom at the Odyssey Aquarium, to Las Vegas, where I was going to try the Bacchanal buffet at Caesar's Palace. In this particular instance, it really was less expensive than several economy flights I've taken in the past, but that could vary depending on routes or airlines or even the day that you're checking prices. For my route specifically, at the time I booked a ticket, the weekday flights were $235, but at the time this video is being published, just a couple months later, the weekday price is already up $20, so $255. I don't know if that's a time of year thing or if prices are on like an endless upward trajectory, but I just want to be as transparent as possible. To prepare for my flight, I changed into a collared shirt after leaving the aquarium because I figured I was about to be in a confined space with a lot of fancy people, so I thought it would be a good idea to look nice and hopefully smell nice as well. And that's why I'm thankful to partner with Mando, who's the sponsor of this episode.
Okay, guys, real quick. So I'm at the 4-minute, 42-second mark. He just talked about the deodorant that he recommends for like the last couple minutes. It's this Mondo stuff, and he offers a code. So if you want that, you can go to his channel to watch this video again, and you can see the commercial. But for now, I cut it out. But let's go ahead and continue watching.
I reached my first hurdle with JSX, and this might be both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, but they operate out of dedicated hangars, not the normal terminals in major airports. So sometimes they're still at a major airport, but just in a different building off to the side somewhere. And other times they operate out of an entirely different airport. In my case, the airport I flew into when I was arriving in Arizona was the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, but JSX doesn't operate out of the Phoenix airport. They actually operate out of the much smaller Scottsdale Airport, which is like 20 miles away, and serendipitously pretty close to the aquarium. That setup can be a strength because it means you avoid the parking and the crowds and the long security lines and the general ruckus of busy airports, but it can also be a weakness because it can sometimes mean that there's no rental car return on site, and that was the case at the Scottsdale Airport. They didn't have a rental car center, at least not like for major car rental places like Budget, Hertz, Enterprise, etc. So what I did was find the closest rental car place, which was about 3 miles away, and then I Ubered the rest of the way to the airport. Relatively speaking, I got there fairly early, but you actually don't have to. Their official recommendation is to arrive 20 minutes before your departure, which is crazy. I think most airports recommend 90 minutes ahead of a domestic flight. If I'm being honest, I like to live life on the edge a little bit and have a bad habit of showing up at airports like 45 minutes before my flight. And that's really about how early I showed up for this flight as well. At the Scottsdale Airport, you just walk into this building, down this nondescript hallway, past some offices, and you find yourself in the JSX lounge. I checked in with the guy at the counter, and he took my rolling bag to go under the plane, and then he printed out a little receipt. And that was my boarding pass. I hadn't even checked in ahead of time online or anything. I think you can, but I wasn't emailed anything about checking in, so I didn't, and it was totally fine. And I can't emphasize enough how casual this felt compared to the normal airport and TSA experience. Like, don't get me wrong, they take security seriously. Like, my bags were swabbed for residue from explosives, and there were metal detectors for weapons. But there's no waiting in long lines, no shouting at you to take your shoes off, put your shoes back on, move your laptops, keep your laptops in your bags. So once I'd checked in, they told me that they'd start the boarding process about 15 minutes before the scheduled departure time. So I had about half an hour to hang out in the lounge. And this is what the lounge looks like. Relatively small, but pretty nice. Not a giant open hangar like I had seen in that episode of Crime Spree, but you can see a bunch of the jets out on the tarmac. There were plenty of comfortable leather chairs, some high top tables, and this little nook style seat, which is where I ended up sitting down. They had these little charging towers, so I took the opportunity to charge like all of my camera gear. And there was also a bathroom for the lounge just outside in the hallway. And those are pretty clean, certainly a lot less crowded than a typical airport bathroom. They had a little bar with tea and cold water and then a coffee machine, so I got myself a vanilla latte. As it got closer to our departure time, more people started to trickle in, and I was super curious to see who else would be on my flight. There were a few other collared shirts, so that felt like a good move. I guess a fair amount of t-shirts too, but I'd rather be overdressed than underdressed. I also saw one fedora, one couple in country club attire, like the woman might have been planning on playing tennis the moment we landed in Vegas. I'm not entirely sure. In terms of the age breakdown, there was one couple that was probably in their early 20s, a guy and his adult son, and then other than that, I'd guess mostly ranging from late 30s to late 40s. Not a crowd I'm like typically brushing shoulders with, but it was super fascinating to me to wonder about their stories. Like, I'm here because I'm filming this pretty unserious YouTube video, but what are you guys doing here? One thing I didn't realize is that JSX is a lot more dog friendly than a typical airline. So there was at least one dog hanging out in the lounge. Not a service animal, just like a pet. They started boarding around the time they told me they would, and that's actually when you go through the metal detector, like right before you get on the plane. And one guy even arrived to the airport building after the boarding process had started, maybe 10 to 15 minutes until wheels up. And he still had plenty of time to spare, not cutting it close at all. So we walked out onto the tarmac to board the plane. Again, very casual. I was expecting the plane to be super sleek and elegant looking on the outside, and it was actually completely covered in.
So I think that's an Embraer. And I say that one because it's got the pointy nose and it's got the engines on the tail, but also because there's no drop down staircase. Usually the CRJs have the drop down staircase. I'm pretty sure that's an Embraer because most of the planes that are out there that are smaller planes like mine are either Embraers or CRJs. I'm always mentioning 145s. This looks like a 145. And I know a lot of times they are bought by a lot of the charter companies. And inside of those, it would be an A, B, C configuration where there'd be 3 seats per row. A would be by itself, B and C would be together. Whereas the CRJs a lot of times are 2 and 2. So 4 per row. But I love that plane. Anyway, let's go on.
In a wrap advertising the new How to Train Your Dragon movie, which was hilarious to me. Nothing says luxury like Toothless and the Jay Baruchel character. I got on the plane and made my way to my seat, which was 12A.
Oh.
In full disclosure, you do have to pay.
Look at that. They chose a different configuration inside, which makes sense because if they got it directly from Embraer, they could have said, like, this is how we want it laid out. I want to see that again. Look at that. Wow, that's fancy. So where the cup holders are, that is generally where the B seat would be. And then the bathroom would be in the back there. But nice. So it's probably either 140 or 135. That's really nice. I like that.
My seat, which was 12A. In full disclosure, you do have to pay extra to pick your seat on JSX. And to be fair, paying for seat selection is one of my gripes with traditional airlines. But I didn't feel like I needed to pay for that in this instance, because here's the good news. Every seat is both a window seat and an aisle seat. You're not sharing armrests with anybody. There's nobody stepping over you to get to the aisle. You're not running the risk of getting placed in the middle seat against your will. Feels like best case scenario. Tiny asterisk here. It's possible that there are some models of their jets that do have the 1 and 2 seat setup, in which case you would be,
So that's kind of a typical seat setup right there for the Embraer. So 145s. Very nice. I really like the look of it. The seats do look like the typical seats. It's just they're upholstered differently because I recognize those armrests. You're looking at row 3 right there. And I can tell that because of the way that this armrest is. That's a bulkhead row. And then here you can see that these armrests will go up. I don't know if you guys care about that kind of stuff, but I'm like the Embraer. I miss that plane so much.
models of their jets that do have the 1 and 2 seat setup, in which case you would be, at least sharing an armrest with someone else, but I can only speak to the one that I was on. Okay, so check out this legroom. When I positioned myself all the way back against the backrest, I would say there was still a solid 8 to 10 inches between my knees and the back of the seat in front of me. There also wasn't like a first class section. I'm 99% sure that my seat was just as nice as the one in the front row. Typically, when you board a plane, you have to walk past first class or business class, and they just stare at you like you're a kid from the districts arriving at the Capitol from the Hunger Games. But not the case on this plane. The seat did recline, but I didn't really want to miss out on this experience by sleeping through it, so I decided not to take advantage of that particular feature. There was a legit wall outlet for every seat, not like the one that you have to blindly fumble around with or ask your seat neighbor if it's okay to use because there are only 2 for every 3 seats. And if my memory serves me correctly,
Typically, the Embraer was never actually outfitted with those, so that would have been custom ordered by the company as well.
of the time those plugs only work after take every 3 seats. And if my memory serves me correctly, a lot of the time those plugs only work after takeoff, but the one on this jet worked immediately, so I kept charging camera batteries. And then the standard stuff up above the seat, the AC vent, reading light, and call button. I would say overall it definitely had like private jet vibes. Maybe just missing a couch or something, or a table. I don't know. I've never been on a private jet. I saw a couple other people taking pictures and videos, which made me feel a little bit better because I think that means that I was not the only first timer on this flight. We took off and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that in-flight Wi-Fi was fully included. Like not just the JV Wi-Fi they give you on most flights where you can only really send texts, but this was full-fledged Wi-Fi through Starlink and it wasn't a separate charge. Those little tables.
Wi-Fi on those smaller Embraers is usually not standard. That's probably something that they did more recently. Also, the reason they have this extra seat here in the middle that's not really a seat, it's a table, but you can see from the leg configuration that it's still kind of a seat, is for weight and balance purposes. They still need to have their weight and balance with all of those rows, which is also why they would want to pick out your seat number for you, because they're going to put you kind of central over the wings to balance out the plane. That's what the weight and balance that I always talk about is. But interesting so far.
Across the aisle did seem like they could be useful, but I didn't feel like I was missing out on too much by not paying to sit over on that side. I'll tell you what though, they do not want you sitting on those things. In terms of in-flight service, I think there was just the one flight attendant, and it was a shorter flight, but there are also way fewer people to get to, so she was still able to serve everyone. And look at how extensive these options are. Both alcoholic and non-alcoholic options were available free of charge. And then what I would consider to be much higher quality snacks than the typical pretzels or cookies you get on most major airline. I went with a Coke, which she placed in the cup holder on the table across the aisle. So it turns out I was, in fact, entitled to one of those. I assumed that maybe the person on that side of the aisle just got both cup holders. And for my snack, I got this venison jerky stick thing. One of the other passengers across the aisle was just straight up getting stuff done. He had a notebook out and was like starting a business or solving world hunger or something. Headphones on, writing nonstop, just absolutely locked in. And another guy was reading a newspaper, just super classy. Honestly, wish I had thought of that. Because of the distance between the seats, the seatback tray table was far enough away where I could actually use a laptop. I didn't know if this fake wood grain thing was part of the How to Train Your Dragon theming, like this pamphlet, or if that's how the trays look all the time. When I've tried to work on a laptop in basic economy, I have to put my arms into T-Rex mode to type without hitting the people beside me with my elbows. And the top of the laptop can't open fully because there's just not enough room. So between the space and the free Wi-Fi, this seemed like too good of an opportunity not to knock out some work. We hit a few more bumps as we got closer to Vegas, quick Hoover Dam sighting, and before I knew it, we had landed. Again, pretty short flight, so I didn't need to use the bathroom, but it did look like there was one available at the back of the plane. This time we did actually land at the main Vegas airport, which is Harry Reid, but like I mentioned, JSX doesn't pull up to the main terminal, so the plane parked near this separate hangar. We did end up sitting on the tarmac for a few minutes while they unloaded our luggage, but compared to the process of getting off a typical flight, this felt like no time at all. It honestly feels like people lose all semblance of order and common sense as soon as that seatbelt sign goes off. And it's like, guys, we're in row 34. They haven't even opened the door yet. Why are you standing up? They made a quick announcement about what address to plug in if we were using a rideshare service, which I was, and then they handed out free mints as we got off the plane. We walked a short distance across the tarmac, through a hangar, and into the Vegas JSX lounge, where I checked out the snacks and bevies and ultimately landed on some gummy bears and cookies. And then I made my way outside where JSX employees were helping get people into their rideshares. And this I can safely say is the service that you don't get at a typical airport terminal. One of the JSX guys loaded my bags into the Uber, while another one went up and asked the driver if he could move the passenger seat forward so that I'd have more legroom in the back. Incredible. So, is this worth it? Should you fly a public charter like JSX? I'll answer that in just a second, but for those that are interested, I do briefly want to address carbon footprint here. For this specific flight, Scottsdale to Vegas, the JSX jet is going to have slightly lower emissions than a regional jet, and both of those will have lower.
Okay, so there's my 145 right in the middle there. 50 seats. This one had 30 seats, which means it would have had at least 15 rows. But if the first row was row 3, then that means it might have had 17 rows. So it's probably originally, I think they're called the 135s. We didn't have the 135s, but I had heard about them. Yeah, the Embraer 135 is a 37-seat regional jet. So they would have taken out the seats for 1 and 2, and then they would have taken out the middle row for all of that. Interesting. But let's go on.
than a 737. However, when you factor in how many passengers fit on each plane, the JSX flight actually burns more fuel per passenger than the 737. So definitely worse for the environment, but not quite as bad as I expected, and still better than like a personal private jet. Either way, I did go ahead and offset the carbon footprint of this flight, and the details of that are in the description if you're interested. Okay, so here are my thoughts on these JSX flights. I think if you're flying one of these routes that JSX services, it should at least be another item on your menu of options that you check when you're planning your travel. You might luck out and find a weekday flight that's legitimately the same price, or at least close to the same price as an economy flight. But if not, it just becomes a little bit of a personal calculation about whether the extra comfort and amenities are worth the extra money. But just as a reminder, the different hangars might mean difficulty returning rental cars or extra steps when transferring to another leg of your journey. Is it going to be feasible for me personally to do this on a regular basis? Definitely not. It's not like this is how I'm always going to fly from here on out. I'll probably only ever do it if the price truly is comparable. And then finally, a while back, I made a video about how you can pay to enter some airport lounges even if you don't have airline status or a fancy credit card. And some people in the comments were like, you're going to ruin it for everyone. This is why we gatekeep things. So I just want to say, hypothetically, what would happen if there was a sudden surge in demand because of this video? Well, to oversimplify things, in the short term, prices could rise, especially if JSX uses dynamic pricing. In the long term, though, they could add more routes or more frequent flights on their existing routes. And in that case, the prices would likely stabilize. And if another competitor entered the picture because of the increased demand, that competitor might offer lower prices than JSX to undercut them, which I think would be a good thing. Although I will say that this type of airline hasn't had a great track record of being around for a long time. Like, they usually have a fairly short lifespan. So who knows what will happen, but I'm going to keep sharing fun travel experiences like this. So if you want to see more of that kind of thing, you can hit subscribe down below. And I'll see you in a couple weeks for the next episode of the Studio Review. But in the meantime, if you're struggling mentally or emotionally, I'd love for you to remember that even when it doesn't feel like it, it's going to be okay. I'll see you soon.
I could use a dream or a genie or a witch to go back to a place much simpler than this.
I thought that was really interesting. How about you guys? Have you ever flown private before? What are your experiences? I would love to hear about them in the comments below. I actually have some stories regarding this, so let me just wrap this up by saying I will put his video link at the end, so if you want to go watch the commercial or any of his other stuff, because I don't know about you, I love the way that he broke down the fuel that was used and how he calculated that. That was fascinating. If you would like to see more of his stuff like that, again, I will link that in the Grab Your Remote section. But for now, let's do story time. Okay, let's start with the question, what is a concierge flight attendant? I don't fully know the definition of being a concierge flight attendant. I just know that I once flew with a flight attendant who had been first a commercial flight attendant and then gone over to be a concierge flight attendant at a charter company, and then came back to our company because of the conflict of schedule that they had. If I remember right, she had children, and she was saying that she was away from home too long. So she had come back to our company, but she said as soon as her children were out of the house, she was going to go back to being a concierge flight attendant because she loved it that much. So if you're ever thinking like, I might like to be a flight attendant, but I don't know if I want to do what you do, like being on call, or maybe you don't want the long flights. Generally, the concierge flight attendants, since they're with the charter companies or the private airlines like the one that he was flying on, they don't get the full flight benefits that somebody with a commercial airline would get. So there is that to know if you are thinking about it. But this is what I was told a concierge flight attendant was from that. She fully sold me on it. First of all, when you're a concierge flight attendant, she said that you are usually flying with like really wealthy people. She said, when you're a concierge flight attendant, you are the travel guide for those wealthy people. And you fly with them from the beginning of the trip to the end of the trip. And that trip could be anywhere from a few days to a month at a time, where you might be in another country. Generally, because they are wealthier, they pay for your hotel and you get like a budget. And she said you make a whole lot of money for a short period of time. And basically, since you're like a travel guide or you're basically their concierge, you're booking their hotels, you're booking their cars, you might be booking restaurants and events and attractions and stuff that they would do at that place. And she also told me that when it comes to the plane, you're in charge of cleaning the plane. You're also in charge of cooking their meals on the plane when you're flying. So you have to make sure to order the food that you are able to cook on that plane. I'm a terrible cook, but I still am intrigued by the thought of being a concierge flight attendant. I feel like I would learn just for that, because I'd always thought, how cool would it be to be a travel guide? I would have loved to have been a travel guide doing attractions for people, even like talking in a bus and telling jokes. And yes, in the plane, I abuse the power of the PA and I tell jokes all the time. Only gotten in trouble a couple times. But anyway, so concierge flight attendant, they have to basically try to keep their clients happy. Then the clients will request them again and again. And then they said they make really big tips for that. So that's what a concierge flight attendant is. And I have often thought that once I hit my flight benefits for life with this job, I would like to try that out, especially because the planes are smaller and you're the only flight attendant. And I love being the only flight attendant. That's the jerk in me who just wants all the glory for myself because I am a glory hog. But anyway, that's what a concierge flight attendant is. Now, let me tell you what I know about private airlines. I've been on two small private planes exactly twice in my life. Once when I was 12, when my dad flew us from Oxnard, California to Los Angeles, California, we were heading to Florida and we were making the connection through LAX. The other time that I did was about a year and a half ago. I did a discovery flight, which is the type of flight you take if you want to know if you want to be a pilot or not. And they can be very expensive, but I actually got mine from Groupon. So if you're ever thinking about doing a discovery flight just to see if you might want to be a pilot or maybe your kids might want to know, check out Groupon. I got it for about $100 here in the Chicagoland area. But yeah, it's called a discovery flight and it does count towards a pilot's license. And usually it's an introduction to the school. Doing the discovery flight was interesting. It felt like flying in a bucket through the air. Have you ever been on like a Ferris wheel? You're in a bucket and it's like open air. Maybe you're in a cage, but it's still fresh air. That's what it felt like. It was very interesting. One of the great things about that is they let you actually fly the plane. They don't let you land or take off, but they let you fly the plane and you get to decide where you want to fly to, which was really fun. So I've been on a private planes, small planes exactly twice in my life. But of course, I see them. I'm around them. Even though I work commercial airlines, I do see charter planes and private planes a lot. First of all, I'm flying to small airports like all the time. At O'Hare, we actually do have a lot of charter flights and smaller private airlines that come through. In fact, one time I remember I was flying on my CRJ and we were coming around the corner and I had happened to be leaning over from my jump seat. I'm looking out the window and we took a corner and I saw this little plane behind us, which surprised me because our plane is usually one of the smallest ones at O'Hare. And the funny thing is that I'm pretty sure it was either a two-seater or a four-seater plane that was following us. The pilot was holding the window open as he was driving on the tarmac. It was the middle of summer. It was very hot and they didn't really have air conditioning in it. He just could not believe that. I asked the pilots about it. Is that common? Do we often have little planes like that at O'Hare? And he said, oh, yeah. A lot of them, some of them used to actually come to the O'Hare gates, like in the end of the G gates, I believe there was one there. But I think they've moved it recently. They've been shuffling some of the airlines around. But I do know that there's also like other buildings at O'Hare where they can actually send people. For example, when Air Force One comes to O'Hare, not only does it stop all traffic at the airport, but they go to a completely different building altogether. They don't come into the O'Hare buildings. One of the stories that I heard not too long ago was I flew with a brand new flight attendant. She was like 18 or 19 years old, very young. And obviously, free flight benefits, great thing. She was telling me a story about how she'd just broken up with her boyfriend, which I think can be common among the younger flight attendants because usually when they're younger, they're trying to date someone. And you know how you are when you're young. The simplest things, the smallest things can sometimes break you up because you think a relationship is supposed to be this way. It's not. So she was telling me about how she was flying from Dallas Fort Worth to Springfield, Missouri, and the seats were completely full. Even though we have free flight benefits, we have to take the empty seats. And if there are no empty seats, we can take the jump seat. But if that plane doesn't have an extra jump seat, then we don't get to fly that flight and we have to try to find another flight. She wanted to go see her boyfriend for the weekend and she couldn't. So she had looked it up and happened to discover that there was a private plane flying from Dallas Fort Worth to Springfield. It was only like $75, she said. She couldn't believe it. She went ahead and booked it and she went and she visited him for the weekend. But then she started telling me this horror story of how difficult it was to get from the main DFW terminals to this little terminal that was still at the Dallas airport, but it like wasn't close to. And there wasn't quite a shuttle for that. And they supposedly said they were sending a shuttle for her and didn't quite make it. And then they finally did get her and rushed her on the plane. And she gets on the plane in her uniform. And I think she said on that plane that there was no flight attendant, if I remember right. And so then everybody was looking at her Like she should be doing the safety demo or something. I think she said the pilot might have done the safety demo. And like I said, it was a year and a half ago when she told me that story. But yeah, she did end up going up there. Apparently they got in fights, so they ended up breaking up. I don't think that has anything to do with the private flight, but I'm just saying that's the story that I know about that. So even Dallas, Fort Worth, and a lot of the bigger airports have these flights, but it may not be easy to go from one to the other, especially with Ubers, because if it's like on the same site, like Dallas is on the same site, the Uber drivers get a premium rate for picking you up from an airport and taking you somewhere else. But if you're outside of that airport, that rate goes down a lot. So a lot of times, if you're just outside of a bigger airport, they won't come get you, even though they accept your ride, and they'll make you cancel it and they'll pick somebody else up. Not all the Uber drivers have figured that out. But the ones that have, like the ones in Orlando, they will make you crazy. If you're inside the airport and you have that issue, you might have a problem because you want to go from one point in the airport to another point in the airport. The Uber drivers probably won't want to take you. You're going to want to make sure that you get all of that transport within the airport figured out ahead of time. So then that way that doesn't become a nightmare for you if you want to try it. So there was a time that I was almost a concierge flight attendant with the company that I'm with. Since our company is a smaller airline, sometimes different organizations will try to rent out our planes and our flight attendants and our pilots and our connections to go somewhere. And I remember probably about 6 years ago, one of the managers called me into the office and I was like, oh, what did I do? And I came in and I said, what's up? And they said, hey, have you ever heard of a guy named Gary Sinise? And I said, yeah. He's that guy from Forrest Gump, right? Just like, yeah. She said, so the Gary Sinise Foundation is chartering one of our flights and we need a flight attendant for it. And I thought of you. I was wondering if you might want to be their flight attendant for a few days. They travel around and they do concerts and they would take you to the concerts and you'd have a hotel, all this stuff. And I was like, are they morning or evening flights? She said they're morning flights. And I said, I'm out. Thank you very much. No. I knew at that time that I had a really hard time. I still have a really hard time getting up too early in the morning. So I turned it down without actually knowing what it was. And then later I found out that the Gary Sinise Foundation travels around the country playing music to veterans and I believe trying to raise money for veterans. And it's an incredibly great foundation. And I was like, man, I should have done it. One flight attendant that I flew with told me that they called him in and they had him be the flight attendant on a charter for an athletics team. So a lot of times, like football teams will rent out our planes and stuff, and then the company will ask us if we want to do it. I don't like to do morning flights though, so I usually will turn it down. But I have done flights where like most of the plane was taken up by a team, especially when we had the 145. And that was funny. I remember once we had these like really tall basketball players and the 145 does not have a huge amount of legroom and they all had their knees sticking up and awkward, like out in the aisle. It's just like, and they were all good looking. I was like, oh, this is a great flight. Did you see the pineapple? I don't know why I'm calling it pineapple. I just feel like that's the proper word for it. If you guys didn't, don't worry. Just check out what the pinned comment is below for this week's question and feel free to answer it from there. I just like to do the little pop up because it's fun. Somebody asked me to read it out loud. I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of the pineapple. So, anyway, guys, I will pick two people this week and I will do an honorable mention that you guys vote for. And I will also do a gimme pass. So the prizes this week are, I didn't really see any products, but I did mention the Discovery Flight and Groupon. You can choose either a $75 Groupon gift certificate, a $60 Amazon gift certificate, or a $50 PayPal Zelle payment. The reason I'm doing more for Groupon is because maybe you might want to take a Discovery Flight. Or even if you don't, you can get something else. I just used Groupon this week to get a couple massages for Valentine's Day with my husband because after all the construction we're doing on the new house, I feel like we really need massages. Oh, and by the way, in case you guys are wondering, why are you still in the old house? Didn't you like say you were going to move? We actually closed on our house last week, but one of the rooms and the basement had mold in it. So the mold people actually went in today and ripped the house apart for us. Like I had them rip out all the drywall in the room that had mold and scrub the basement, and we get to take the house back tomorrow. So in the next couple days, I will finally believe in this big, gigantic house that I spent 6 years doing construction on. And I'm going to start a new channel about the craziness that I'm doing in the new house. And I just found out 2 days ago that the new house that I thought was built in 1903 was actually built in 1854. And I am like, holy cow. The floors are in amazing condition considering they were built in 1854. I heard it was a show house in the neighborhood. So the new channel I'm going to be doing is basically like renovating that house the lazy way. The goal of that channel is going to be like how can I get my house to clean itself? That's what that channel is going to be like. So I will be posting links soon if anybody wants to actually watch those. And I'm probably going to be sticking to 2 videos a week for quite a while until I get more of the work done on that house. The videos will be different because I'm going to have an editor edit those. Anyway, guys, in the meantime, if you want to win this week's giveaway, make sure that you put your answer under the pinned comment in the questions below. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you like it, please let me know by hitting the like button. That does help me promote the channel, as does pushing the hype button. And I only do the giveaways for the first 24 hours after each video is released. So it usually ends at Wednesday at 6 p.m. Make sure that you hit the subscribe and notification bell so you can be notified and you can enter the giveaway that I give away every week. Each month, I'm hoping that'll get bigger and bigger as the channel's revenue grows, because I'm just trying to give it all back to you guys. Now I've said that, see you guys in Sunday's video. Ciao!